battle for city streets, and at its simplest, it's been a battle between the kind of forces of motordom and children, and that battle has come and gone, and the big battles happened in the 20s, I think, in the USA, and I'll talk about Peter Norton, and and that battle is still happening, and we need that battle to end, and we need that war to end. And what would peace look like? And one of the things I talk about is projects like this one. Now I know that's it's a particular narrative, but it's one I come back to, and it's not about a war on cars. It's a war for streets. It's a spatial war, and car and the forces of motordom are on one side, and I think children are on the other.
Yeah, I love it. Well, I love it. You just did my intro, Tim. That was fantastic. I love this. Tim Gill, thank you so much. Welcome back to the Active Towns podcast. That was fantastic.
I'm very happy to be here, John.
Tim, I love giving my guests just this opportunity to introduce themselves. So I'm going to turn the tables over to you for just about 30 seconds. Really quickly, who is Tim Gill?
Right. So I'm an independent researcher and writer, and as ardent followers of your channels know, I have written on children and their freedoms and their freedom to play out and get around their neighborhoods, and on the crucial role of neighborhood design, town design, cities on children's lives. And I remain deeply focused on how we can make towns and cities work better for children and young people.
Yes. And I do say welcome back, because you have been on before, and you alluded to the fact that you were part of one of my earlier seasons. We are wrapping up season 9. I don't know if you knew this or not, but this is the final episode for season 9, episode 300. But you were on a previous episode where we talked about your book, because you mentioned that you are a published author, writing on these issues of childhood safety, childhood independence, and trying to reintegrate the ability for children to actually live vibrant, thriving, independent lives. For those who are not familiar with this particular text, this particular book, what's your overview of what this is all about?
Right. So the book my aim is to elevate the status of children in urban planning and design, to say that, how we design cities has a really big impact on children's lives, for good or sadly more often for ill, and that that far too many towns and cities are not designed with children in mind, and as a result, children's freedom to get around, their opportunity to play out, their general health and well-being are all badly affected. And turning that around, if we want to make cities better places, not just for children, but for everyone, if we want to make them more walkable, greener, less polluted, then one really powerful way to do that is to bring children into the conversation about cities. To literally and figuratively put them in the picture, because that helps us focus on what's, in the collective best interests of all of us, and it also helps us focus on the long term, because we can't help but think about the future when we think about kids, and it helps to overcome some of these short term and often narrow vested interests that stop us from taking the action that's needed to make cities work better for everyone.
Yeah. And we have on screen here some young chap from a few years ago, way back in season 3, episode number 106. So I'll be sure to include the links to that episode. And here's the video version as well as the audio only version of that episode. So yeah, I always love bringing guests back on after you've been on before, because that gives us an opportunity to catch up. And we have seen each other since we recorded that particular episode, because I got to meet up with you personally in person last summer when I was in the London area, and you were gracious enough to serve as my host, my homestay host, very much in your local village. But why don't you bring us up to speed? What has happened in the intervening time since that first episode when we first brought urban playgrounds to the world?
Yeah, well, it was a pleasure to have you, John, and thank you for that cue. I guess, I mean, the book has been well received, and there is, I think, growing interest in this idea of the importance and the power of seeing cities through children's eyes, if you like. And yeah, a bunch of people who some of whom you'll know, and cities are beginning to talk more and get more active about greening their neighborhoods, thinking about playgrounds, children's mobility, school streets. But for me, it's not going far enough or fast enough. And I think if you took a helicopter view, in many cities, things are getting worse. So there are examples of good things happening. I'd like to take some credit for some of them, but by and large, the picture is not good. And I'm trying to figure out why that is the case. And I keep on coming back to the big problem, the big 1-ton elephant in this room is the car. It's and in particular kind of car-centric systems that in different ways and at different levels normalize the way that we, not just the way we think about neighborhoods and streets and parks, but the way we think about safety, about who has the kind of right of, the claim on city budgets, on the legal systems, on how we educate children and drivers, all of that big picture. I think of it as a kind of car capture. And it is, I cannot overemphasize, it's a system problem. This is not about demonizing individual drivers. It's about looking back and seeing 100 years of the normalization of a kind of car focus. And yeah, we need to really open up that historical perspective, I think.
Yeah. And speaking of historical perspectives, you know that I've had Peter Norton on multiple times here on the channel. I think he's up to 3 or 4 times already. And I always look forward to bringing him back to have further discussions, because he's probably the foremost historian really looking at these issues. And similar to what we see on screen here, which is, I'm not sure what year this particular clipping came out of, but I mean, this is really indicative of the historical perspective that as the automobiles came into our streets and became the interlopers taking over our streets, there were tensions and there were issues. And there was a resistance. We all know about the 1970s resistance against the automobile and child deaths through the Stop de Kindermoord movement in the Netherlands, and that became famous, infamous. There were other things at play that were happening also in the 70s that also influenced the fact that that particular country decided to shift gears and move in a different direction. Somewhat. It's not a perfect situation over there, but for the most part, it got better, whereas many other nations really struggled and really leaned into accepting and adopting the automobile as the way of life. And then the unfortunate results is, as you had pointed out in your introduction, is that many of us, specifically children, are really suffering in this exchange that took place.
Right, and Peter Norton has been a huge influence on my thinking, and what he lays bare beautifully in his work is the kind of origins of this way of framing almost everything about the places where we live. And what he shows is that within a pretty short period in the early 1920s, the way of thinking about urban streets flipped from being places where all sorts of things happened. Children played, people walked, streetcars went through, and there was a kind of messy fairness. I mean, it wasn't perfect, but it was, there was a kind of equality or a sense of shared space that flipped in about 5 years to being streets are for cars. Everybody else's job is to get out of the way, and that was absolutely embedded in the laws, in policies, in the way towns and cities and entire countries planned neighborhoods. And that settlement, the terms of trade, if you like, in streets, first of all in the USA and then pretty much everywhere, go back to that. And crucially, the thing about safety, and that cars had the claim on driving through streets, and everybody else's job was to get out of the way. And there are a few glimpses of a different future, and you're showing one now with the Radburn, New Jersey. But that's a very interesting image, that you can see that the town for the motor age. So what Radburn tried to do was come up with a design that kind of took the cars out of the picture. That where you could own a car, but the places where cars went, the streets where cars went, were separated from the streets where children played. And there's something in that model. I mean, it kind of failed because it's very difficult once you embed cars in people's everyday lives. Then they want the cars where they're convenient. So there's a whole big thing about parking and the relationship between the houses where we live in and where our cars get parked, that the Radburn model didn't really solve, I think, properly. But what that does speak to is a recognition, really, that cars and kids aren't compatible, that cars are very dangerous objects to have around children out of doors. And we still, I think, trying to figure out different ways of coming to terms with that fundamental conflict. And this next image that you're showing up is kind of a personal one in a way, because on the right you can see literally the view from my front door, not the house you stayed in, not my current house, but it's my previous house. And it's a very, very common image for people living in the UK, in lots of parts of the world. I know in the USA it might look a little bit different, but the general sense is you step out of your door, what's the first thing that you see and hear and are aware of? It's cars, parked cars and moving cars. And then the other image that you can just see in this pair of images is that very rare thing, a car-free street. This is a home zone, in fact, in Leeds, another English city, where actually cars are allowed in that street, but the terms of trade are flipped. And in that street, you don't see parked cars. Cars have to drive very slowly, and the kind of pedestrian has the priority, if you like. So what this reminds us of is that if we want children to be able to gradually venture out as they grow up, to literally and figuratively set foot beyond their homes into the neighborhoods around them, we really need to think about what they encounter when they step out of their door. And why is it that for so many families in so many homes around the world, what they encounter is an environment that's dominated by heavy metal objects that they then have to immediately learn how to keep themselves safe from. And that's is one way of framing this problem. Why is it that these dangerous objects are placed so centrally in the habitats that we're creating for the young of our species.
Right. Yeah. You said a few things there that are worth diving a little bit deeper into, and for many people who might be tuning in, either listening to this on the audio only podcast feed or tuning into this on YouTube and seeing the video or Patreon, um, for many people, they might be thinking, oh, childhood safety. What you really are saying is that, oh, this is dangerous out there in the real world. We need to wrap them in bubble wrap then and protect them from this. You're not really saying that. You're saying the reverse. We need to be addressing the fact that we have allowed our environment to become dangerous. That's what we need to address. We don't need to be isolating our children and or, protecting them continuously, because that's kind of in conflict with what you just said, is we need to be able to create an environment where the kids can venture out and have independence.
Right. It's really hard, this, because actually parents know that they can't afford to just let their kids out. There is a real challenge there for parents, and as children grow up, for children, and that on the one hand, we absolutely do want to allow our children to grow up and gradually expand their horizons, and cars are an obstacle to that. But that's not going to go away anytime soon. So there's the immediate problem for parents, and it's a tough one, and I don't underestimate it. And I don't want people, our audience, to think I'm scaring people unnecessarily, but I also don't want people to think, oh, I'm going to say, yeah, there's a quick fix here. There isn't a quick fix. And one of the things that I think we need to start figuring out is how we get back to a different frame for thinking about safety in neighborhoods. And the frame is, as you've hinted, the frame is the children deserve the right, should have the right to be safe from the harm from cars when they go out of their homes. And that should be the baseline. And at the moment, that is not the baseline, and it's going to take a while to fix that. So how do we start to get at least going in the right direction? We don't go in the right direction by just keeping kids indoors or trying to drill them into navigating this world that's got traffic danger in it. And that's, again, an insight that we get from history, is that actually, by and large, what has happened is that children have lost freedom. Children have, over generations, been effectively, it's an emotive phrase, but almost like, kind of imprisonment in their own homes. And again, you're showing the visual here of that maps the kind of shrinking of children's horizons over successive generations. It's an image I use a lot in my talks. Actually goes back to the researcher and former GP William Bird, who was very concerned about the health impact of this sort of loss of freedom in childhood. And yes, childhood is complicated. There are lots of social forces that shape children's lives, but one of them, surely we would agree, is the growth of traffic and traffic danger, and that there's a kind of fundamental unfairness about the current situation, which is that we're putting all the onus on children and parents to deal with traffic danger, and nowhere near enough responsibility on the systems that have led us to create these environments in the first place.
Yeah. I think that this is just an absolutely beautiful image, and I've used it several times, since our very first episode that we recorded back in season 3, because it is such an illustrative graphic and image that is so powerful. When you see that, the sun of this particular mother said that she was able in 1979 to be able to walk about a half mile. The grandparent was able to walk a mile. The great grandfather was able to have a range of about 6 miles of being able to get out, but the son is like literally 300 meters to the end of the street in 2007. That's a powerful message to send.
Just to make the point that actually many 8-year-olds aren't really allowed beyond the shadow of their own homes.
Exactly.
So when I use that word imprisonment or prisoners, in one sense, it's literal. The many children today have effectively become consigned to their own dwellings in a way that, and with all sorts of, kind of quite predictable but tragic consequences for their health and well-being, but also just for their quality of life in the here and now.
I want to address one of the other gorillas in the room, which is one of the narratives that are also sort of out there on the minds of parents, and because of the media and the way that they play up events, is to point out that yes, there is that concept of stranger danger and child abductions and things of that nature. And I always like to try to get ahead of that ball rolling, and basically say yes. And when you really look at the statistics, it's no different than it was way back in 1919. And so it's, that is, yes, it is a fear, and you have to be empathetic with the fact that is a concern. But at the same time, to your point, the real danger and the real reason and cause for this shrinkage of independence for kids is the danger posed by cars. Is there anything else that you'd like to add to that before I shift gears and talk about another group of people that I think is experiencing the same level of imprisonment?
Yeah. I mean, only just to say, you're absolutely right. I mean, sometimes I feel numbers don't always help, but I think one of the things that maybe will help, because that's clearly a fear in some people, is this, and it's a sense of the bogeyman, predatory figure in the neighborhood has almost become the embodiment of our fears, right? It's like a fairy tale of what's happening. And fairy tales have a grain of truth in them. Often, myths have a grain of truth in them, but any reasonable, rational assessment of where the danger lies in neighborhoods will be, I think, will make it clear where we really need to be focusing our attention, and also that kind of wider loss of connection with the world outside our front doors is something that's happening for adults, and that's, I'm not talking about a sort of romantic connection with nature here. I'm just talking about the sense that the world beyond our homes is reasonably benign, and it's a place that we want to nurture our children's connection with, not terrify them about.
Yeah. And you just mentioned adults as well, and that's exactly the direction that I wanted to go with this, is talking about the fact that I can see parallels to this shrinking amount of real estate in which we can roam for certain adults. And specifically the elderly, after they've lost their ability to drive, their world shrinks a tremendous amount if they're in an environment that isn't safe for them to get around in an automobile. And then also the non-drivers, people who have never or have recently lost the ability to drive for whatever reason, they also have a shrinking amount of space, of real estate, of geography that they can be able to get to. That sense of independence has really shrunk. I recently had Isabel Clement from Wheels for Wellbeing there in London on talking about the disabled community and how having safe and inviting streets that encourage people to be all ages and abilities to be able to walk and bike and roll and stroll and be able to get around to their community is so empowering for the disabled population as well. So I see parallels. We're primarily talking about children here, but children are a proxy, because if it's a safe and inviting environment for children, more than likely it's going to be a safe and inviting environment for all ages and abilities.
Yeah, right. And yes, and partly we do need to talk about things like public transit and giving those choices, choices for people, including children, but those other groups you mentioned who can't or don't drive. But I would also just add, I mean, I don't want to get into a kind of any sort of competition for people's sentiments or support, but children are, 20-25% of most populations, and crucially they have no vote, they have no voice, unlike other sections of society that do, at least, well, in democratic countries anyway, have some ability to get their views and voices heard. Children do not. So more than any other group, children need the grown-ups in the room to recognize and respond to, and make life better, and take that responsibility for making children's lives better.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. I had Anna Zeibarts on to talk about her new book regarding non-drivers and when driving is not an option. And through the research that she has been involved with, determining that as much as 30 to 40% of any city's given population are actually non-drivers. And so, and that includes the children who don't have the power of the ballot box and being able to vote. But it's oftentimes very surprising and astounding for the driving public to realize that there's that population, especially city leaders, to realize that, oh, you mean 30 to 40% are quote unquote non-drivers, and many of them not even having access to an automobile, maybe for a variety of different reasons, including poverty levels and socioeconomic status and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, it's an excellent point. I want to pull up this overhead illustration that you passed along to us and dive deeper into this modern child's conundrum, which I think is connected to that previous overhead map that we looked at. But let's talk a little bit more deeply about this particular conundrum. It doesn't scream that it is North America, but it could certainly be anywhere USA, as well as anywhere modern communities, especially suburban context around the globe. I could totally see this being in Australia, New Zealand, as well as in Europe as well.
Yeah, and plenty of housing estates in the UK as well. And what this image captures, I think, is that so many neighbourhoods, districts where families live, it's really, really difficult for kids to get out and find places to hang out and play, and even just to travel the smallest distance beyond their front doors. And it's not just the danger, if you like, although traffic danger is a part of the fit factor. It's about sprawl, it's about parking, it's about the kind of severance from traffic, it's about the lack of genuinely welcoming convivial public spaces. It's also sometimes about adult attitudes, and places where the laws or the people in charge just don't want kids there, especially teenagers who are really treated appallingly in many, even in parts of the cities where there's a nominal idea that it's public, plenty of parks and shopping malls. Teenagers are essentially labeled, they're demonized and labeled as troublesome and pushed out. So that's, I think, what I really like about this image. Again, it shows this is not just about individuals or, the way we treat each other as individuals. It's about the systems. It's about the way neighborhoods get built, and those wider cultural and social values that then come out of the physical environments that we live in.
Yeah, yeah. And I think there's a part of this too that is, yes, to your point, a little bit of it is the distances. If we've sprawled things out and we have created an environment where to get to that meaningful destination, including your school, if your child, or or the park or a friend's house, the distances are so great, compared to what it was like before, when those distances were relatively short, comparatively speaking. But the other part of it too is that literally a big part of this is like the design factor that is encouraging the motor vehicles that are present to travel at greater speeds. And I look to this particular image that you passed along as like a feature of designing of our streets, that when you really look at this from an engineering perspective, you realize that this is designed for speed.
Right. So yes, this is in the village where I grew up. It's not the street where I grew up, although it could be. But what you can see here is how this is a cul-de-sac. It's a dead-end street that comes off a slightly busier street. There's about 10 or 12 houses on this dead-end street, and yet the way the road has been designed is to just make it really easy for cars to swing out of that main road into that side road, and as a result, the crossing distance for anyone trying to cross that tiny street is 16 meters, 16 yards, when it could be so much less. And every yard that we add there is another yard that makes it, of course, takes longer for anyone to cross, and it encourages cars to come round at speed. So that's a kind of microcosm of the design thinking that gets played out in suburban and urban neighborhoods around the world. And it's worth remembering in all of this that, suburbs only came into existence because of the car. So, now they're omnipresent. They're everywhere. I grew up in a suburb. I'm guessing you probably did, John. The vast majority of your audience will do. And yet it's an entirely 20th century invention, and would not have been possible without the growth of the car as the predominant means of transport. And then that's one of the ways in which things get normalized, is we can barely imagine having a street that looks any different, because it's been around for so long and we've all grown up in those streets. And of course, that's the way it is. And streets, why? Yeah, of course, people want to park their car outside their house because it's convenient, and people worry that their cars might get hit or stolen. And you say, hang on, time out. Couldn't we use that space in a better way? Couldn't we, if we want kids to be outdoors and active and to meet with other kids, and maybe we want to spend a bit of time with our neighbours who we share our town with, do we really want the first space that we come out of when we step out of our front door to look like this, to be basically a racetrack with more cars parked on the edge of it? I don't know, John, if you can queue up one of the other images that I sent you. This is there's an aerial view of a very different neighbourhood. It's still suburban. You can recognise it as being, a kind of low density neighbourhood, but in some neighbourhoods that are being built in the UK and in the US and other parts of the world, the space you come out of when you come out of your house isn't a space that's dominated by cars. It's a green, welcoming, shared public space. Thank you for that switch. I think, by the way, this is a scheme that was designed by Dinah Bornat, a British architect who, I don't know if she's been on your show, John, but if she hasn't, she should be, because she's really doing great work influencing housing and housing design. She also has a book that just came out, which is called All to Play For. She's very, very strong on the need to really think about what it's like for children and families growing up in neighborhoods, and doing a much better job in building new housing. So yeah, that's the one example of the kind of reframing and bringing to bear a new or a different set of values when we think about what houses, streets, and neighborhoods can and maybe should look like.
Yeah, yeah. And I want to point out to the viewers that are looking at this particular image and try to describe it for the listening only audience. And I want to point out that this isn't a complete war on cars, and cars are not allowed, and we're not restricting your ability to own and operate a car. If you look very, very closely, you can see that, oh yeah, there's a garage right there. There's a BMW parked right in that spot right there. And so it's not like we're not restricting freedoms. We're not banning cars per se. What we're trying to do is create an environment where people can have legitimate mobility options. We're actually trying to create more freedom, not less. And really trying to embrace the concept that we don't have to just settle for automobiles overwhelming our public space in our realm.
Right.
So yeah. I just want to point that out.
Yeah, I mean, I sometimes talk about balance. That, and again, for the best part of 100 years, we've got the balance wrong, and we've placed far too great a focus on car ownership and car movement, and so that's what really needs to turn around. And you made some points earlier about how children can and we were talking about how children face barriers when they want to venture beyond their front doors or get around their neighbours. There are still far too many children today who are dying on streets in the USA, in the UK, and in many other countries. So this is not just a kind of, like, sometimes it's uncomfortable for us to talk about child death. Obviously, it's as a parent, it's the worst thing you could possibly contemplate. And I want to acknowledge, there'll be people in your audience who will have, in different ways, had some knowledge or experience, or will know families who've lost children or where children have died from traffic danger. And it's a 100-year problem. In one sense, the statistics would suggest that it's a problem that's being solved. But at what price? It is very clear that far fewer children are dying on streets in the US, North America, Europe, than was happening 20, 40 years ago. But at what cost? And by the way, I still think the numbers are too high, and it is, it really troubles me that in many areas of child safety, we'd hear the phrase, if we save one child's life, then that's worth doing. But somehow we don't say that. In North America this year, in the USA this year, 350, 400 children will be killed by drivers walking around American streets. And the year after that, and the year after that, and actually some of the figures are suggesting that it's getting worse. That, I think, is a moral outrage. It should be an absolute priority that gets turned around. And that is not the responsibility of individual children or individual parents. It is the responsibility of those who make the political choices and the design and the planning and the land use and the legal and the educational choices that lead to those children dying. And actually, Wes Marshall, whose book is right by my desk here, Killed by a Traffic Engineer, has a really tragic story about two teenage boys who die on the streets of Vancouver. And the commentary about those deaths effectively blamed the boys for that happening. They shouldn't have crossed where they did. They were wearing dark clothing. But what Wes Marshall does brilliantly, and I've seen him talk on this, is zoom out and show that those boys, all they were trying to do was get from their homes to somewhere else, and the streets made it all but impossible for them to do that safely because of the wide streets, fast traffic, lack of sidewalks and crossings, and all of that is, it's almost it's not predictable that those children on that occasion had that terrible tragedy, but it is predictable that over a year, that's what's happened if we don't fix the systems. And your next image is going to a topic. Yeah.
And I want to tie this particular image to what we were just talking about too, with the childhood fatalities, as pedestrians, to point out that when we look at the data of the 40,000 plus lives lost in the United States annually, and we look at the number one cause of death and serious injuries of children, it's actually as occupants of motor vehicles too. So there's a false sense of security that many parents have of saying, oh, it's so dangerous out there for our kids, being outside of a car, walking and biking. Yes, that's true. But there's a false sense of security that putting them into their overly large automobiles, especially the SUVs and large pickup trucks here in North America, is somehow going to be the safety that they require. It's not. And that's kind of where this photo gets to, is that we see this car bloat situation and the arms race that is taking place of that false sense of security of having bigger and bigger and bigger, larger and larger vehicles, because what kind of goes with that is the mass goes up, the violence of the crashes go up, the false sense of security, the speeds go up, and that's part of the risk compensation theory that happens when we have more safety, mechanisms on cars. We, as humans, we drive faster and more aggressively. And so I wanted to hone in on that as we look at this particular image, which really hones in on the car bloat situation, because we have this cute little mini that is like this tiny little thing from years gone by. I don't know what year this was. And then surrounded by these very large SUVs, which are still quite small from US standards.
Right. Yeah. This is my photo. I was walking through a London street and saw this, and the Mini was the most popular car in the UK for decades. I mean, it really was. Yes, it was. Of course, the name tells you it was designed as a small, and affordable and all of that. It almost looks like a toy in this photo, and I know. And I'm sure you'll have discussed this, that in the US, and we're seeing this in the UK as well, clear evidence of greater deaths on the roads from SUVs. And that's now in the long term, we need to fix that. We need to fix it over the long term by looking at regulations for cars. This is the point where I want to remind your audience, and of course, how do we get this reframing? I think one of the ways to get the reframing is to say the car is a consumer product, right? It's something that we buy because it makes our life, or we think it makes our life better and easier, and we can do stuff that we didn't used to be able to do, or do it more quickly or conveniently. It's a consumer product, and yet it's a consumer product that in ordinary use leads to tens of thousands of deaths every year. Now, in any other consumer product, that would be game over. And that's another way of trying maybe to get a handle on the degree to which we've normalized a car-centric world. That how can it be that we've landed, and not only that, but the consumer products that we're now buying and that the car manufacturers are selling are more dangerous and are leading to more deaths. That is, to me, it's crazy and has to change now. And I'm watching with interest, what's happening in some cities that are trying to tackle that. So Paris is one city that's looking, I think, and maybe it has brought into place some measures to try and discourage large, heavy SUVs. It's being talked about here in the UK, it has to happen if we want to create places where we turn around the terrible trends in children's lives that we've seen for the last 10, 20, 40, 50 years. Yeah. And I know you come partly from a health background, John, and you'll know all of those stats about obesity and inactivity, but also mental health problems. Now, those are complex problems, but it doesn't take much to see that one of the causes of those problems is that children are spending far too much of their time indoors, isolated, sitting down, and they don't want to. They want to be out. They want to see their friends. They want to play. And it's the environment that's a big factor in stopping them from doing that.
Yeah. From an epidemiological perspective, we are far more effective as society of getting more people off their couch and out their doors and active and engaging, walking, biking, doing things, than creating a situation, an environment where they're cloistered in, feeling like the only thing that is safe is for them to stay indoors and stay in their house, and then get into an automobile and drive to their workout facility, their gym, and do a workout there. It's far more effective for us to create and transform our built environment into people-oriented places. And that's where I want to shift gears and talk about, because it's sounding awfully depressing here, Tim. We're like focusing in on death and all of this and bloat of automobiles. And it's like, I can understand where, especially with parents, are like, well, hey, both Tim and John said that this is a war out there on our streets. And if it's going to be a war, I want to make sure I go into war with the most armored equipment I can get. And therefore I'm going to buy into that consumer product that is going to be the safest for my family. And so that escalating arms race of larger and larger vehicles, I want to reframe this, and I want to get to something that's a little bit more positive. And right in your neighborhood, you guys have a wonderful example of the fact that you can transform streets, you can transform villages, and you can transform the environment into much more people-oriented places. And so you don't know that I'm going to show this, and I don't even know if you've seen this, but I want to show this video here of me rolling down Orford Street. Talk a little bit about the story that is this success story of this particular street. Go take it away, Tim.
Yeah. So this is pretty much my neighbourhood, and what you're looking at is the Mini Holland scheme in Walthamstow. As its name implies, it's trying to create a kind of Dutch style, walking and bike friendly neighbourhood and reduce the dominance of the car. And it was unusually it was large scale, so it was a whole neighbourhood. It was ambitious. It effectively created a district or an area where you couldn't cut through that neighbourhood at all in a car. You could still get to anywhere you wanted to get to, pretty much, in a car, but you couldn't go through it. And there were lots of traffic measures that stopped cars from driving into streets or slowed them down, and in some cases actually created a kind of pedestrianised street. And it was at the time it was being brought in immensely controversial, and there was a point where pubs and bars in my neighbourhood had a sign up saying, "Do not talk about Mini Holland. We don't want to know." It was really kind of creating great conflict. Now it's valued. It's accepted. It's a place. This street in particular, Orford Road, is the kind of place where you come out on a sunny afternoon or evening, and there's tables and coffee bars selling their wares to passers-by. It feels almost like a kind of Mediterranean style holiday destination. I'm not really exaggerating. It's very convivial. Now, so the short version of the story here is that it's a chunk of the city where there's a radical reprioritization away from cars and in favor of biking and walking, and that has been shown to lead to lower pollution, more people on foot, greater footfall, and people just being more happy about the neighborhood that they live in. And so it's a kind of proof of concept. And I can't claim any personal credit for it particularly. I mean, I've been a flag waver, but I wasn't closely involved. But I think it's a large scale demonstration of how things can be different, and it's something that you can show to decision makers and say, look, this is what good looks like. This is what a kind of peace. Talk about the kind of war that this battle between children and others, and the forces of motordom, and this is what peace, or one example of what a peace in that battle looks like, and I celebrate it. So yeah, that's the Waltham Forest Mini Holland.
Yeah. And you mentioned that there was a great deal of controversy and pushback and fight against something like this happening. And we do see this around the globe, of pushback against change. And we have to be empathetic to the fact that, yes, change is difficult. Change is hard for people to understand and grasp if they've been used to something for many, many decades being one way, especially just getting in my car, driving everywhere for everything. And so this could be threatening, but it is clearly a success. You see this young tyke on their bike, balance bike rolling by, and others on little push scooters and strolling by. I went to this environment every single night that I stayed at your place, because it kept drawing me back. I wanted to be there. I wanted to take my dinners there and relax and just embrace this environment. And so in my mind, this is a huge success. And I get the sense that it's a huge success in the eyes of these business owners as well.
Yes, it is. I think just a couple of points. Yes, the reframing is really important, and the recognition that some people, do lose out when we try and reprioritize and move away from the car. And actually, one of the things that I hope we will do well in future is to figure out, is to better respond to those people who have genuine and legitimate concerns. Maybe their own business is very car dependent. Maybe, that they have personal circumstances that mean they really need to have access to a car. And I think that's important to say, that not everybody who is opposed to these measures is a bad actor. There is a lot of bad acting going on, and there's a lot of scaremongering. But let's figure out how we can get that settlement to work well for as many people as possible. I am also clear that there will always be people who will feel upset and lost. If there was a quick, cheap, easy way to make everywhere better for everybody, we'd all have done it by now, right? There are trade-offs. And the other thing to say about these sorts of measures, and it is important to recognize, is that there can be some tricky long-term side effects, around gentrification, around house prices, around people feeling that their neighborhood won't be the top of the pile or next on the list. So I think those questions about equity and the kind of longer term, especially in the UK, we have, I think, a lot of suburbs where it wouldn't be so easy to move away from the car because there isn't good public transport. In London, in my part of London, in many parts of London, public transport is pretty good. So there are alternatives. What do you do in neighborhoods where there aren't alternatives? Okay, one thing we do is we make sure the new neighborhoods that we're building look different. and I'm really keen on and I'm actively involved in some of those. But I think another thing we do is we kind of start where people are and figure out how those suburban contexts, we can maybe make some smaller steps and bring people with us to a degree. But in other contexts, we do have to, and I admire the politicians for doing this here in Waltham Forest. We have to be prepared for a bit of a battle and for a backlash and for some bumps in the road before we get to the point where we can show people that these changes are worthwhile and have a really strong positive impact.
Yeah. And, address concerns. Like if a business has concerns of how will I take my deliveries of my goods and services? And here's a great example of you creating management system in place so that, there's a time of the day that those deliveries do take place. And we also saw that there was parking of cars available in the earlier sections of it. And so this particular stretch of the quote unquote car-free zone is a very, very short zone. And to add to that, I don't know if I had a clip in there or not of the bus coming through. There's frequent bus service that comes through one way down that street. And so it was really fascinating to me, the fact that it wasn't a completely motor vehicle free zone. It was just calmed and tamed to the point where clearly the people just took over the space, especially in the evening time there when the families are out and the businesses are thriving and there's people sitting about, and you see people in wheelchairs going by, you see kids on scooters and razors and bicycles. And I think that it bears repeating that this is not a war on cars. We're just talking about creating the word that you used earlier, which is balance, and creating, as the word that I used earlier, is mobility, choice, and freedom. We're just trying to establish some sense of balance.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that the Mini Holland shows you is that getting to that point where you really do see, people biking, children scooting, and that level of freedom and the visibility of children. Getting to that point is hard, and we need to push harder than we have been doing to get those results. That car-dominated streets are, it's not just enough to slow the traffic or to take out a few parked cars. It needs to be more radical than that. And that is a challenge. But of course, you and I know, and transport planners will know that yes, it costs money, but we're spending a huge amount of money right now on building vast highways, including in urban areas, that have, I think, been continue to get a free pass compared to the kind of measures that you and I want to talk about.
Yeah, I point out that yes, it does cost some money, as you just mentioned, but it's nowhere near as expensive as what we're doing for car infrastructure. And the return on investment is so much greater. We know that creating people-oriented places that really embrace all ages and abilities has a return on investment that's far greater than what you will see on any expansion of any motorways and adding lanes. Now, earlier you had mentioned that you're working with the other thing, because one thing is to transform our built environment as it exists, transform those streets into more people-oriented places like Orford Road, which we just used as an example. The second area that you mentioned is, okay, when we are building new communities, can we get it right from the first place and make it a more people-oriented place? Talk a little bit about Hartree here.
Right. So, yes, Hartree is a big new or potentially a planned new district in Cambridge. So one thing's important: it's not London, it's not one of the big cities. It's a smaller city in the UK, quite traditionally. It's of course very historic, but sprawling place. And this is has the ambition of being a high density, more or less car free district in that city, where the whole story is around making it a great place for children and families. Now, it's in the early stages right now. It hasn't even got through all of the planning processes. It will probably be, I don't know, 20 years before we can really look at how things go with Hartree. But I'm really excited about it. I'm working with the developers, Town, which is a company that's done some other great child-friendly developments. There's government involvement. There's a lot of support behind this. And we've worked up a set of design indicators. So not just a kind of aspiration, but a set of practical tools that will help the developers who are building out this new chunk of the city, that will help them get it right for children and families, about looking at where do we park the cars? How easy is it to step out of your front door and get to an attractive shared green space? How easy is it to get to your local school or to public transit? And those are, so it's really trying to bake in this reframing that we've been talking about through this whole show, and turn around that instead of baking in car dependence, we're baking in, play, children's mobility, and a kind of rich community social life in Hartree. So that's the vision. Maybe get me back on the program in 10 or 20 years, and we'll be able to see how well it's been realized.
Well, hopefully it doesn't take that long. We're seeing some, even in North America here, we're seeing some new developments taking place that are embracing the concept of being car light. I've profiled Cul-de-sac, I've profiled Indigo. These are two developments that are really leaning into this concept of we don't need the automobile to be the central feature of how we design our communities. And so hopefully things will move along a little bit quicker because God knows we're building other communities that are car dependent much, much quicker and much faster. Tim, is there any final points that you'd like to make before we part ways?
Really, yeah. I just want to quickly open up that this is a global challenge. I know, in a way, we've been mainly thinking about kind of North American, European audiences, but one sentence message I want to leave people with is, we made a lot of mistakes in Europe and North America. And where is the city building happening now? Where is the population growth? It's happening in low and middle income countries. It's happening in the Far East, in India, especially in Africa. So anybody who's watching this or listening to this who has influence in those emerging economies and countries, please learn from the mistakes. Don't go down the car dependent route that we did for 100 years. Get that reframing, get that rethinking. I know there are big challenges in those parts of the world, but there are also incredible opportunities, very young, vibrant populations. We can make the cities of tomorrow, the big and emerging cities of tomorrow, so much better in Africa, in Asia, in South America, if we get those lessons and get those conversations happening. And tragically, right now, in many of those parts of the world, the deaths of children in streets are at appallingly high levels. And that's what makes this really urgent for me, is that we're seeing a potentially a repetition of the mistakes that we made, but also that really huge opportunity to have a massive impact on in the first place, just stopping that appalling, it's a global pandemic that's hidden in plain sight that we've been seeing, and that has to stop. But what a future we could offer in those countries and contexts if we can turn around that car-oriented way of thinking and instead create cities that are genuinely walkable, green, welcoming, and child-friendly. That's the vision I want to leave people with, not just in Europe and North America, but everywhere.
Everywhere, yeah. I'm really glad you mentioned that too, and I'll refer folks to episode number 297, where I was interviewing Supreme Odata Mitchell from Nairobi, Kenya, and we were talking about some of the things that they're doing there in Africa. Tim, this has been such a pleasure having you once again on the Active Towns podcast. Thank you so very, very much for helping me close out season 9 in episode 300. Again, Tim, thank you so very much.
It's been an honor and a pleasure. Thanks, John.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed this episode with Tim Gill. And if you did, please, hey, give it a thumbs up, leave a comment down below, and share it with a friend. And if you haven't done so already, be honored to have you subscribe to the channel. Again, just click on the subscription button down below and ring that notifications bell. And if you're enjoying this content here on the Active Towns channel, please consider supporting my efforts by becoming an Active Towns ambassador. Super easy to do. Just click on the join button right down below, as well as navigate over to activetowns.org. Click on the support tab at the top of the page, and there's several different options, including making a donation to the nonprofit. You can buy me a coffee, as well as become a Patreon supporter. Patrons do get early and ad-free access to all this content. Again, thank you so much for tuning in. I really do appreciate it. And again, this concludes season 9, and we'll be back with season 10 after the summer. So we're going to be taking a break from the podcast, and I'll be on the road traveling via Amtrak across North America. And yes, I'll be producing content and getting that out to you along the way. And if you'd like to support my trip as I'm making my way around North America, again, head on over to activetowns.org, click on that support tab at the top of the page, and I'll have special updates for all of my supporters along the way, from the rails, from the road, so to speak. Again, thank you so much for tuning in. I really do appreciate it. And until next time, this is John signing off by wishing you much activity, health, and happiness. Cheers. And again, just want to send a huge thank you to all my Active Towns ambassadors supporting the channel financially via YouTube memberships, YouTube super thanks, as well as making contributions to the nonprofit and joining my Patreon. Every little bit adds up and is very much appreciated. Thank you all so much.